I was having breakfast with a buddy that some of you may know, a guy named Don Schaefer, who runs RSF Social Finance over on the other side of the bay, over at his place here in the Berkeley, Oakland area. And we were talking about how difficult it is to really basically just get anybody's attention, even people that are completely aligned with what you're doing in the world, and how hard it is not to take that personally. And because of course we are all the center of our own universes, and forget that we are the center of nobody else's, no other person's universe. And so I sit here today, or stand here right now, and just I'm absolutely humbled by the fact that there are this many people here to talk with me and Mike and Timothy and Reem about B Corps. And I feel very similar today to how I felt that first day when I was walking around the West 4th Street courts in New York City, called the Cage, if anybody here is a ball player or knows anything about ball in my former life. And I saw the first kid I'd ever seen wearing an N1 tee. And I literally ran down the street and almost tackled the kid. Because I couldn't believe that something that had been basically just in mine and my partner's brains was actually like out there in the marketplace and had been embraced in any way, and seemingly having nothing to do with anything that we did. Like it just sort of showed up there. And I feel a little bit like that today, that Jose was kind enough to invite us out to talk with you, and we didn't do anything other than just sort of show up. And there's some B Corps, some amazing entrepreneurs here that represent diverse industries and talents that showed up to speak on behalf of this idea, and there's 80 some odd people that are saying, what the heck is all this about, that we want to learn something about. And so I'm really profoundly humbled, and I feel like I'm not going to run out and tackle any of you if you're worried about it, but I am profoundly humbled that you're here to hear about what we're all collectively up to. There are a couple things in the brief introductions that took place, that just themes that I think you'll see running through this. One is about partnerships. And Michael, is that right? So Michael was talking about how the power of reinvention, and what Nicole has done here, is in the process of doing here with ECBF. And in reinventing an organization, and one way to think about what we're doing with B corporations, what these entrepreneurs are doing, is they're really reinventing the corporation. And in doing that, they are reinventing capitalism, or maybe a slightly different phrase or different word than reinventing is really repurposing. They're really repurposing private enterprise to create public benefit, not just private wealth. And that is a profound thing to even be talking about, let alone to have real people in the living flesh who are actually doing it and walking that in building competitive, profitable businesses, but that are also creating impact for their communities, for their employees, and for the planet. So that notion of reinvention and repurposing, I think, is we share that in common in terms of what we're after. The other piece is what I was just talking about helping communities, individuals, sort of achieve maximum impact. And at the core of what we're doing, it's really around that. And so I realize that there are a number of different, the beauty of this, and sort of a reflection of your new sort of voice and face in the community, is I looked at the attendee list, and there are public sector folks here, there are foundation folks here, there are nonprofits here, there are entrepreneurs here, there are entrepreneurs of small businesses, large businesses, there are entrepreneurs of consumer products, finance, technology, and there are financial services folks from large and small institutions. And the notion of partnerships and the importance of sort of looking out over the horizon and recognizing that fundamentally none of us can do any of this alone. And none of the change that we seek in our communities and our own lives in the world can happen without a profound humility in recognizing that we need each other to get there. And so the idea of repurposing, of doing that with other people, and to the objective of maximum impact is pretty much the story of B Corporation. So thank you very much. So a quick little history is I was part of a partner group that bootstrapped a basketball, footwear, and apparel company, consumer products company, from nothing to about a $250 million business. It was a phenomenal place to work. We wouldn't have called ourselves a responsible, sustainable anything. It was just a place that we were proud of, and how we treated our employees, in how we managed our supplier relationships, in our philanthropy in the community. We sold it in 2005, and throughout the last few years of that, myself and my other partner in B-Lab, Bart Houlihan, and one of our early investors and Stanford buddies, a guy named Andrew Kasoy, the third partner in B-Lab, we're all thinking about what was next. Bart and I had had together a lucky and successful career in the private sector. Andrew had been a private equity investor for almost 20 years in various places on Wall Street, most recently with MSD Capital, Michael Dell's personal family office. And we were all asking sort of what's next for all of us for the next phase of our professional lives. And the more we looked out there, the more inspired we were with organizations like Give Something Back and NUMMI. We didn't have the pleasure of knowing what Cathedral was doing at the time. We were inspired by the stuff that the folks at Juma Ventures were doing, like at Evergreen Lodge. And there were just so many amazing social entrepreneurs out there and social investors out there. And we said, oh, so the first instinct is, well, we'll do that. And one was really cool, but it wasn't started with an intention of public benefit. And so there was a limit to what we can do. What if we started another company, but with that intention, how good could we be? And we realized, well, we probably wouldn't be as good as Reem, and we probably wouldn't be as good as Mike. And if we then got a little bit cocky, like most cashed-out entrepreneurs do, and they say, oh, I could do a company, well, that means I could do a fund, because how easy is that? If I can run one company, I'm sure I could invest in other companies. And so then we said, well, no, we probably couldn't be as effective as the folks at TBL Capital or Timothy in managing money, because we really don't have any experience there. But after the 100 and so people that we spoke to, several hundred people that we spoke to in each of these fields, what was clear to us was that the world didn't need a single another company. Nor did the world need a single additional double bottom line, triple bottom line, sustainable venture fund. But what all of those organizations were saying they needed was some basic infrastructure to lift this entire emerging sector. And so what we felt like the highest and best use of our limited talents was to really do the very unsexy infrastructure play, which we called B-Lab. And so there were three elements of infrastructure that these entrepreneurs and investors, academics and thought leaders were talking with us about. That they said, without these three things, this marketplace cannot rise with the speed or to the scale required to meet the challenges in front of us as a society. And those three things boil down to standards, a legal structure that is created to support for-profit social entrepreneurship, and a way to build collective voice and project the voice of this disparate community with a lot more clarity and power into the marketplace. And that all boils down at some level to this very simple question, which is how the heck do you tell the difference between a good company and just someone who's doing a good job marketing? And now, as someone who did some pretty decent marketing for over a dozen years, I understand what good marketing is, and I understand how powerful brands are to sort of cut through clutter in the marketplace. But I also know that marketing is just money well spent to communicate a particular message. It doesn't really necessarily reflect what's actually the underlying values or practices or performance of that person or people who are doing the marketing. And so ultimately, B corporations are trying to answer this very fundamental question. And they're trying to answer it for consumers, for investors, employees, suppliers, et cetera. And so very simply, a B corporation is a new type of company that uses the power of business to create public benefit. If someone has a clearer or more succinct way to say it, we welcome your advice. And what distinguishes B corporations from other businesses, even other sort of socially responsible businesses or green businesses, is that B corporations actually have met comprehensive and transparent social environmental performance standards. Now, there's lots of amazing organizations out there that have existed for the last 20 years upon whose shoulders we stand here today that have created this notion of social entrepreneurship or sustainable business or fair trade or organics, et cetera. But with the exception of sort of very narrow certifications around fair trade practices or organic food or elite building or things like that, there's nothing that's looking at the entire company. So there's nothing that looks at not only how it treats its suppliers in the developing world, but also how it treats its employees here. Is it creating wealth or just good jobs? Is it active in its community? Is it philanthropic, but is it also dumping effluents into the river, but then giving money to the river keepers, right? That's not a particularly satisfying form of philanthropy. And so, and the second thing, there's also legal standards, which we'll talk about in a second, which is how do you create a company that is actually accountable to multiple stakeholders and not just beholden to the short-term financial interest of its shareholders. So those are the two elements of standards. And the third thing is that they're building collective voice through the power of a unifying brand, the B Corporation brand.